Yeah, so my name is Bengt Karlsson. I'm a professor of social anthropology at Stockholm University. And yeah, first of all, thanks to the seed box. I mean, they've been really generous. I managed to get a sort of a grant for the project that I'm talking about now. And I think it's a really good idea with this model, because normally when you apply for larger grants, it's a really lengthy process. And I think this mechanism of sort of a slightly smaller application and also more speedy process, I think is something really helpful when you want to develop new things. So, as I said, I've been working in the field of environmental anthropology, sort of / environmental history / political ecology for a long time, and mainly in India among indigenous communities up in the hills. This is the part known as Northeast India. And I've been sort of working in areas where you have a lot of tea plantations around you. But I never really been interested in tea as such, and not the plantation as such either. I've been working in forest areas, looking at mainly conflicts about mineral resources, land issues, forest issues, and sort of avoided. I mean, tea was there, of course, because again, a lot of the people I've been looking at, have been displaced or removed from areas where you started cultivating tea. But as I said, not directly looking at tea. And it actually happened when I moved to Kenya because of my wife's work, and then by chance I was out for a sort of a Sunday outing where they were sort of in a tea plantation, where they were serving lunches and in a sort of a nice, I'm coming to that later on, but I mean, a tea plantation can be quite beautiful, I would say, but we can talk about that later. Anyway, so, and the woman in charge of that was telling us, giving a bit of information about the plantation, about tea, and then she was saying that all the tea planted here is Assam tea. And Assam has been the sort of the area where I've been working. I thought, this is too good to not look into. So there has been a lot of work on sort of the distribution of plants around the globe. But I thought this was just sort of a wonderful thing in a way, that, the plant that was discovered growing wild in India, up in the northeast of India, how that has sort of traveled over to East Africa, and then now becoming one of the sort of the main crops. I think, tea and tourism is the largest income for Kenya as a country. And there's been a lot of work on tea in India. But what we discovered with this project is very little has been written on tea in Kenya, which I find is rather surprising. So I've been thinking about, so when we started off this seed box grants, the idea was because there's been a lot of work on plantations. And again, when social scientists and in the humanities looking at plantations, we're mainly focusing on the labor issue. And again, I think, when you have the image of a plantation, we think about sugar plantations in the Caribbean, slaves. You bring people and you bring a plant into a space where you clear everything, all the vegetation for it. So it's sort of a slavery of people and a slavery of plants, as some put recently. So it's sort of the idea of a death zone, really. And we were trying, we decided early on that we want to sort of apply a more sort of a multi-species thinking, more than human, thinking about the plantation from the point of view of the plant, of the tea plant itself. And this has been sort of really struggling in a way. It's sort of mind-boggling in a lot of different ways, because, I think this is one of the longest papers I've been trying to publish. It's like I can't really get over whether this is a worthwhile exercise. Is it somehow that you're silencing all the suffering of the people in the plantation, to think through the sort of the eyes of the plant. And again, if you have we've been just following the news about in the Amazonas, where all the forest fires going on. And of course, this is not happening by chance. This is happening because people want to clear the forest. You have cattle ranches, but you also have sort of plantations of soya beans and stuff like that. And this is sort of when you clear a place, there will be a lot of deaths, of course. And this is a dead animal. And again, the idea that this is from. There's been some recent very interesting work on this. People talk about sort of a second wave of plantations expanding in the global south. And there's been some recent work, quite a lot of work on oil palm plantations. And this is a picture from Indonesia where you see sort of the idea about the forest, and then you clear everything and then you plant. I mean, you create a sort of a modern grid of a disciplined landscape where you plant a sort of the plantation crop in straight lines. And there's been, for example, the work by Tanya Marie Lee. She's been working on oil palm plantations in Indonesia. And again, you know, really talking about it as sort of this idea about the death zone, you know, really where local ecologies and local people and sort of traditional forms of subsistence are sort of extincted or removed. And so I think that becoming, and also, I mean, I think Anat Singh has suggested the idea about, you know, Anthropocene being sort of the plantation scene, or I think it was actually Donna Haraway who coined that term about, you know, the present day is really sort of the day of the plantation. And again, suggesting that it's slavery of people and plants that are dominant. So again, you know, trying to sort of, can we think about the plantation differently? And again, you know, posing whether that is a good move or not. So yeah, so we started, we had a group of researchers, Kenyan partners and Indian partners. And this is just a photograph from one of the tea plantations in Kenya. And again, I think there is something with this landscape, you know, the sensory aspects of a tea plantation. I mean, that there are, you know, you have the pain and the sufferings, but you also have a sort of a sense of a greenery. You know, when you come out, and I don't know if anyone of you has seen a tea plantation, but I find them quite attractive, sort of. They're quite beautiful in certain sense. Yeah, so the idea here is that, you know, the British discovered. This is, you know, sort of the part of the world where I can't reach up, but sort of northeast region is the area where I've been working. And the British discovered, I mean, the British was, you know, tea became, I mean, even quite early became sort of in large demands in the UK. So, and China was the large producer of tea, and it was sort of the East India Company was trying to somehow find an alternative source of tea. And then, by chance, in a way, they discovered in the early 19th century that tea was growing wild in the upper parts of Assam, you know, in the sort of, well, and so that was a really major finding. And then they were trying to take that wild, and in the beginning they didn't really trust that this was tea because it looked different from the tea they had, the tea plant that was in India. So in the beginning they said, okay, they saw a similar thing was growing here. So, and the areas where that was found, it was in the indigenous territories. They removed the people, said, we can't trust these sort of locals to take care of these very valuable areas, but they didn't trust the local tea plant. So they brought a Chinese tea plant and tried to establish plantations with this Chinese plant. But that didn't work. So eventually he said, okay, let's try with this Assam tea plant. And then developing through the sort of second part of the sort of 1880s, 70s and onwards, start developing these large tea plantations in Assam. And then eventually, by the turn of the 20th century, the Assam tea, I mean, India was one of the largest producers of tea, black tea in the world. And then again, taking the tea plant, or actually seeds, and that's why I'm saying that this project is really been about traveling seeds. So they were taking over tea seeds and started production in other parts of the world, and of course again, we're looking here into East Africa. And quite quickly, again, Kenya became one of the largest, I mean now it's one of the largest producers of black tea. So we were sort of interested in this movement of the tea seed itself, and what happens when you move a plant from one part of the world into another part of the world, and the type of relationship the plant established in this new place. I mean, with the soil, with the insects, with the birds, with the animals. So all these sort of entanglements that sort of plays out in the plantation. And we also had an artist in the project, James Muriaki. He was a sort of a photographer, and also, yeah, he's doing a lot of different things. And one of the things that he was somehow, you know, again, one of the things that he got early on interested in was the tea flower. Because again, when you think about the tea plantation, you think about the greenery. But tea plants the bushes do go into flowering. I mean, they try to avoid that in the plantation. They want to control. I'm coming into that later on. But I mean, in the early phase, it was all seed-based plantations. Later on, it's made by, what do you call it? Clones. So you get an exact copy of the same tea bush. But anyway, so he became interested in flowering, and this is also in the tea sciences when they try to develop new, sort of in the plant breeding, they look at the flowers. So and they allow the tree, actually tea is a tree. It can grow up to 20 meters if you allow it to sort of be wild. And in certain parts of the world, you still have tea grown on trees, so to say. But in the plantation, they try to keep it's like 1 meter, which makes it easy for the pluckers to pluck. But if you allow it to go into flowering, they have really beautiful white and yellow and also other colors. So this is, he developed a series of photographs as part of the project. And you see the leaves. One of the things we were looking at, and I'm coming back to that, you know, in the top you see the purple leaf. And this is the new development in Kenya where they've sort of developed a new gene, I can't speak now, what was I talking about? A new clone called purple tea, which consists of this particular sort of health-bringing substance, which is the same, again, I always forget what the name, but it's the same as in blueberry. So it's considered to be a very healthy form of antioxidant and other things in it. And it's also supposed to be tea that can handle more sort of extreme weather conditions. So it's, again, suggesting to be work well in the sort of in the Anthropocene. So he's been doing quite interesting work on the flowering and flowering part, and also he's been also looking at the soundscapes on the plantation. There is a lot. It's a very sort of tranquil place in a way. It's, I mean, pluckers come out. Every area is plucked every 10 to 12 days. But these huge areas, and you see pluckers here and there. But otherwise, it's quite silent landscape. But in the plucking, he's been looking at the sort of chip, chip, chip when you pluck the leaves, you know, the type of sounds that are in the plantation. And also, I mean, some birds, some monkeys, is a bit of, but otherwise it's a very still place, I would say. This is just another photograph of the tea plantation. And one of the things that we were looking at was tea research. So as I said, you know, climate change is really affecting the tea industry in a big way. I mean, one of the advantages in Kenya is that there is much less bugs or insects that are harming the plantations. So, but now with climate change, increasing temperatures, and also more extreme rainfalls and longer dry spells, the conditions are changing. And I think one of the things, I mean, in Kenya, tea was basically a colonial crop up to the, more or less up to independence, or in the 50s, 60s, it will start changing. So it was only the settlers that were allowed to grow tea. But they were opening up also. So today we have more than 50% of the tea is produced by smallholder tea planters. And so we still have the corporate sector, but the small-scale sector is increasing more and more. And so there is a very active tea research going on. And this was also something we were looking at because, again, there's been a lot of exchange between India and East Africa in terms of tea research. And the first phase of tea research was really to find more productive varieties of tea to increase the production. But they reached now, and this is the interesting part, when we talked and met with the tea researchers, they realized that they've been extremely successful in developing more productive tea. And then sort of the idea was that going from seed-based plantations where you have a lot of genetic variety in the plantation to clone-based tea, where you have, as I said, you know, it's a monogenetic field, which they now realize is a problematic thing, because again, with the increase of the climate change, you can wipe out field in one go. So they realize that they have to sort of, so they've been successful, but again, that start biting back. So they try to find ways of reintroducing genetic, sort of a more diverse genetic into the plantation. This is just a slide to show you. So this is one of the journals, tea research journals that started in Assam, in the Tea Research Institute in Assam. It's called two and a bud, because when you pick tea, you're supposed to only pick 2 leaves and a bud, sort of the fresh small leaves. And that is a huge thing. I'm not going to that here, but one of the things now is that, no, I'm not going to that actually. So in Kenya, as I said, it's been very, one of the things, advantages here is that the much less of pests, but there's only one major pest, or it's a sort of a virus that affects the tea bush. So it seeps into the roots. It's called root. What is it now? Root rot. So it's affecting the root system, and then eventually the leaves start going brown, and then eventually the bush dies. So when that happens, you have to remove the bush, and then you just leave that place for 2 years, and then you can again plant a new tea plant in place. And also, I mean, again, thinking about what is going, this is what I'm trying to do. When you walk around, so I've been spending a lot of time walking in the plantation and just noticing what is going on there. And as I said, not a lot is happening. I mean, yeah, you see when, again, thinking about, the movement of plants do move, but it's a very slow movement. So normally when you are in the plantation, you will notice birds, monkeys, other things that have a sort of more visual movement. A tea bush, and this is something that other people have pointed to in the plantation, a tea bush in the plantation is almost like a human life. After 70 years, they start growing old, not producing as well. So what they do normally is that you replace the bush after 70 years. And it's quite, when you are, so this is just a photograph from when they were clearing a field. I don't know if you can see it, but there was just sort of having a caterpillar and just, it's a very violent scene in a way, uprooting these trees that for 70 years has been producing tea, and now he's just sort of removing them. But again, in that place they will plant new rows of tea bushes. This is a field with purple tea. So you see the difference with the green tea and the purple leaves. And yeah, I'm sort of, one of the things, again, thinking about the plant, and purple tea was really something that I mean, again, thinking about care in the plantation. Among the tea researchers, these are people that have dedicated their entire life to tea. So they are really intimately related to tea. And when we met with the tea researchers, they were all very much into purple tea. They perceive this as the sort of the future, the hope of the Kenyan tea industry in the sort of in the Anthropocene or under condition of climate change. And I'm sort of, so a lot of the planters we met with, the smaller, Kenyan planters, they were going into purple tea, but and thinking again, that the market will pick up because people are becoming more and more health conscious. So they were sort of hoping for the Western and the Japanese market to sort of discover purple tea. And of course, when you're at the Tea Research Institute, the first thing they would do is to serve you a cup of purple tea. I don't know if anyone of you have tried purple tea. I've sort of got a little bit hooked, I must admit. I don't know, it feels good to drink. You just add a little bit of lemon in it, and then it's sort of sort of similar to green tea, but with a twist. And so I would spend a lot of time with in a plantation, sort of a rather big, privately owned, this is a Kenyan guy who invited me to come to his plantation. And he was sort of chairman of the Purple Tea Association, or he was the second assistant chairman of the Purple Tea Association in Kenya. And he was, in all field, every field that he was, replacing, he planted all purple tea. And again, really hoping that this will pick up. And when again, this is just a sheet. So his farm, this is, you have all the information of his plantation here. So there are, the dates of the time, so up to the, I think it's up to the, you see, when it says Assam, so up to basically the 60s, 65, it was all this seed-based Assam tea. And then from that on, they've started planting clones. So he still has some of these old plantations in production. And some of them, he say, keep on yielding very good yield. But then from, I think, 2011, when that was the time when the purple tea was released from the Tea Research Institute, he has then planted purple tea. Yeah, and here you see the numbers, also the numbers of the, actually numbers of bushes. 2,161,476 bushes. I find it sort of very interesting. So the whole, in a way, you have, on this sheet, you have the whole plantation in a way. This is just a photograph of his plantation. I don't know what do you think about it? But there is also a lot of, on his farm he keeps also a section of indigenous forest left. There is also a plantation of eucalyptus and some other, for other tree species. Yeah. I don't know how I'm doing time-wise. So I'm just sort of, so this is how, they try to then, there's so many things to say about this, but I'll try to sort of stick to time. But this is how they are marketing the purple tea. And one of the things with this is just to sort of end up, there's been, for example, work by a sort of anthropologist slash botanist called Serena Ahmed, who has been working on indigenous forms of tea production in the Yunnan province of China. And what she's suggesting is that under conditions of climate change, we have to, the whole tea industry have to change. It has to go into more small-scale farms so we have larger biodiversity or different crops together. And this is actually something that we discovered during the work. This is a sort of a small family-owned tea farm where they introduced Mira, Mira cat, that cat, the ones that Somalis are famous for meeting. So they have combined cat, you see the trees, they look quite odd, the cut trees, together with the tea plantations. And this is along the sides, they have banana trees and others. So this is a type of things that the farmers themselves start experimenting with, which again, allows them different sort of, so they can harvest different, over the year they have sort of a more steadily income, because otherwise, again, with tea and a lot of this, a lot of the plantation crops, when you harvest, you have to start process it quite, otherwise, you ruin the tea leaves. So again, if there is changes in the prices, you still have to sell to the factory if you don't have your own factory. So this allows them to sort of concentrate on the crop that is more profitable at a particular point of time. So this is what we are trying to do in this project, just following the plant and see what is going on. But I think there's a lot to say about this, Yeah. I think I stop there and allow for questions later on. Thanks.
Thank you.